The morning light streamed through the tall windows of a sleek, open-plan office in Austin, Texas. The faint hum of keyboards and the occasional muted laughter of coworkers sharing small talk punctuated the room. For most employees, it was an ordinary Monday. For Marcus Taylor, however, it felt anything but ordinary. Every morning felt like a battle he couldn't avoid, a war he fought silently and alone. Marcus Taylor, a 34-year-old black man with a penchant for crisp suits and a quiet determination, had worked at Sterling and Whitman for 5 years. To him, it wasn't just a job. It was a chance to break generational barriers. His family believed in the power of hard work, and Marcus embodied that belief. But lately, he had begun to feel the weight of his efforts collapsing under the unspoken tension between him and his manager, Clara Bennett. Clara was a sharp, no-nonsense leader who had risen quickly through the ranks. To some, she was a symbol of perseverance. To Marcus, she had become the source of unrelenting hostility. At first, the signs were subtle: a dismissive tone, ignoring his ideas during meetings, and amplifying his mistakes louder than anyone else's. Over time, her actions became harder to ignore. For Marcus, every interaction with her felt like walking a tightrope, knowing that one misstep could send him plummeting. On this particular Monday, Marcus walked into the office gripping a steaming mug of coffee, mentally preparing himself for the day ahead. He had a big presentation scheduled, one he had spent weeks perfecting, but when he reached his desk, he froze. His presentation slides, carefully crafted and detailed, had been altered. His intricate points were stripped down to generic bullet points, barely scratching the surface of his work. At the bottom of the document, Clara's initials were stamped as if she had been the one to create it. A wave of frustration washed over Marcus. It wasn't the first time Clara had taken credit for his work, but this time, it stung more than ever. Despite his rising anger, Marcus kept his composure. He had learned that confronting her directly often led nowhere, just more condescension and subtle retribution. But he knew he couldn't let this slide. Not this time. "Good morning, Marcus." Clara's voice cut through the air like a blade. She stood at his desk, arms crossed, her lips curled into a smug smile. "I made a few changes to your slides. They were a bit too complicated." Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze with a steady calm he didn't entirely feel. "I see that," he replied, his tone measured. "I'd have appreciated a heads-up before you made those changes." Her smile faltered for a split second before returning, sharper than before. "Well, that's why I'm the manager. I know what works for our clients." The subtle jab landed squarely. Marcus clenched his jaw but didn't respond. Arguing with Clara in the middle of the office would only play into her hands. Still, a thought gnawed at him. Something was going to tip the scales today. He didn't know how or when, but the tension was building toward an inevitable breaking point. As the morning dragged on, Marcus tried to focus on his work, but Clara's interference lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling of being undermined, of having his hard work stripped from him and repackaged as someone else's achievement. The weight of it all, the unfairness, the hostility, the subtle racism that lingered beneath Clara's actions, pressed down on him. By the time the team gathered for his presentation in the conference room, the tension was palpable. Marcus had rehearsed every line, determined to salvage his work despite the changes. He was ready to make the most of the situation. However, as he set up the presentation, Clara leaned casually against the doorframe, a cup of tea in hand, exuding an air of superiority. Her presence alone was enough to unsettle him, but Marcus reminded himself of the stakes. He wasn't just doing this for himself. He was doing it for every person who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. The room filled quickly, with coworkers chatting, some reviewing notes, and others scrolling through their phones. Clara clapped her hands sharply to gather their attention. "Let's get started. Marcus, the floor is yours," she said, her tone clipped and dismissive. Marcus took a deep breath and began. Despite the altered slides, he delivered his points with clarity and confidence. He weaved in details Clara had removed, ensuring his coworkers understood the depth of his work. Nods of approval rippled through the room as they absorbed his insights. For a brief moment, Marcus felt a spark of vindication. He had turned the situation in his favor. But Clara wasn't done. Twice, she interrupted him with questions that seemed designed to undermine his authority. They weren't about clarity or genuine concerns. They were about asserting control. Still, Marcus pressed on, refusing to let her derail him. As he wrapped up, the room erupted into applause. "Great job, Marcus. That was really insightful," one of his colleagues, Vanessa, said with genuine admiration. Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, well, it seems Marcus had some help with this," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The team effort really shines through." The jab stung, but Marcus kept his expression neutral. He refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Yet, as the meeting ended and people filtered out, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the day wasn't over. Something was brewing, something that would change everything. The applause from Marcus's presentation still echoed faintly in his mind as he gathered his things. Yet, the sting of Clara's words overshadowed any sense of accomplishment. The team effort really shines through. It was a thinly veiled attempt to diminish his work, to strip him of the credit he had so painstakingly earned. Marcus had learned to tolerate her digs, but this time felt different. He couldn't ignore the growing tension, nor could he suppress the simmering frustration bubbling beneath his composed exterior. As Marcus returned to his desk, Clara's voice cut through the office once again. "Marcus, a word in my office," she said curtly, not bothering to mask the edge in her tone. Her office was a reflection of her demeanor, cold and unwelcoming. The minimalist decor, devoid of personal touches, made the space feel sterile. Clara gestured toward a chair, but Marcus remained standing. He could sense this wasn't going to be a casual discussion. "Let's cut to the chase," Clara began, her tone icy. "You've been walking a fine line lately, and I need to remind you who's in charge here." Marcus frowned, confused by her accusation. "With all due respect, Clara, I don't understand what you mean." She leaned forward, her expression sharp. "The way you handled that presentation, borderline insubordination. You went beyond what was necessary, and it made me look incompetent in front of the team." Marcus blinked, stunned. Insubordination? For delivering a thorough presentation? Her eyes narrowed. For going beyond the scope of what was required. "You're not here to outshine your manager, Marcus. You're here to follow orders, not to act like you run the place." The accusation hung in the air like a storm cloud. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had delivered the presentation with precision, salvaging what she had stripped away, and this was her response? "With all due respect," Marcus began carefully, trying to steady his voice, "I simply wanted to present the full scope of my work. I didn't mean to overstep." Clara's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "Don't forget your place here, Marcus. You're not the decision-maker. You do the work you're assigned, and leave the thinking to people like me." It was in that moment, as the phrase, "people like me," lingered in the air, that something inside Marcus snapped. He looked at Clara, his disbelief evident. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with a quiet fury. Clara didn't back down. If anything, her gaze hardened. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You know exactly what I mean. You're here to follow orders, not to play hero. Or have you forgotten where you come from?" The words struck like a thunderclap, leaving the room in heavy silence. Marcus's chest tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The air felt suffocating, thick with unspoken truths and undeniable tension. And then, Clara crossed the line she couldn't uncross. Her voice dropped even further, almost a sneer now. "You're nothing more than a glorified slave in this office." The room fell into an unbearable stillness. Marcus's breath caught as the words reverberated in his mind. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think. His mind raced with emotions, rage, disbelief, humiliation, all swirling together into an uncontainable storm. But silence wasn't an option. Not anymore. Marcus straightened his back, his voice steady and sharp as he spoke. "I beg your pardon, Clara?" Her confidence wavered ever so slightly, but she held her ground. "You heard me. Don't act surprised. This is the reality of our workplace, Marcus. You don't get to rewrite the rules just because you want to feel special." Marcus took a step forward, his composure like steel. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I've worked tirelessly to get to where I am, and I will not let anyone, least of all you, belittle my contributions or my dignity. What you've said today is not only unacceptable, it's reprehensible, and you will be held accountable for it." Clara's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Marcus's unwavering stance was unlike anything she had expected. "I'm done tolerating this," Marcus continued, his voice growing firmer. "This ends here. Right now." He turned on his heel and left her office, his heart pounding. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his silence lifting. As he walked back to his desk, his coworkers looked at him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. Marcus didn't stop to explain. He had something far more important to do. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing. Clara's words, her actions, and the years of microaggressions he had endured. It was all going into a detailed report. Marcus knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about ensuring no one else would ever have to endure what he had. The report wasn't just sent to HR. It was sent to the company's leadership, to every person who had the power to enact change. Marcus wasn't going to let Clara's behavior go unnoticed. This was bigger than him. It was about justice, accountability, and the future of the workplace. As the email was sent, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his heart still racing. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Clara would fight back, and the fallout could be unpredictable. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The email Marcus sent became the spark that set everything into motion. Within hours, the company's leadership had received his detailed account of Clara's actions, complete with examples of her consistent undermining, racially charged remarks, and outright hostility. His report wasn't just a list of grievances. It was a call to action, a demand for accountability and a safer, more inclusive workplace. The immediate response was muted. Marcus knew it would take time for the higher-ups to process the gravity of the situation, but he didn't regret his decision. For years, he had held back, prioritizing his career stability over his dignity. Now, he understood that remaining silent only enabled the cycle to continue. By the end of the day, whispers had spread throughout the office. His coworkers, many of whom had witnessed Clara's behavior but felt powerless to intervene, approached him one by one. Some offered words of support, while others shared their own experiences of her condescension and favoritism. "You're brave for speaking up," Vanessa told him. "I've seen how she treats you. It's not right, and it's about time someone called her out." The next morning, Marcus received an email from the HR department requesting a formal meeting. The message was professional yet vague. But Marcus knew this was the beginning of something larger. He spent the rest of the day gathering additional documentation, emails, presentation edits, and testimonials from colleagues who were willing to stand by him. When the meeting finally took place, Marcus walked into the conference room with his head held high. Across the table sat two senior HR representatives and a company legal advisor. Clara was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mr. Taylor," one of the HR representatives began. "We take these allegations very seriously, and we want to assure you that a thorough investigation will be conducted." Marcus nodded, his demeanor calm but resolute. "I appreciate that. I only ask that this investigation is handled with the seriousness it deserves. This isn't just about me. It's about the culture we've allowed to persist here." Over the following weeks, the investigation unfolded. Clara was placed on administrative leave, and the company began interviewing employees who had witnessed her behavior. To Marcus's relief, many of his colleagues came forward to corroborate his claims. What had once been whispered frustrations in the break room now became formal testimonies. As the investigation gained traction, the ripple effects extended beyond Sterling and Whitman's walls. News of Marcus's stand reached the local business community, sparking discussions about workplace discrimination and toxic leadership. Articles were written, panels were organized, and Marcus was invited to share his story at a diversity and inclusion forum. At first, Marcus hesitated. He wasn't seeking the spotlight. He only wanted justice and change within his company. But as he reflected on the broader implications of his experience, he realized the importance of using his voice to inspire others. At the forum, Marcus spoke candidly about his journey, the challenges of navigating systemic bias, the toll of remaining silent, and the empowerment that came with standing up for himself and others. His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had faced similar struggles in their own workplaces. Change doesn't happen overnight, Marcus told them, his voice steady. But it starts with courage, with refusing to accept the unacceptable and demanding better. For ourselves, for our colleagues, and for the generations that follow. Back at Sterling and Whitman, the company was undergoing its own transformation. Clara's behavior had exposed deeper issues within the workplace culture, issues that could no longer be ignored. Leadership initiated mandatory diversity and inclusion training, revised their policies on harassment and misconduct, and implemented an anonymous reporting system to ensure employees felt safe voicing their concerns. As for Clara, the investigation concluded with her termination. The company released a statement emphasizing its commitment to creating a respectful and inclusive environment, acknowledging past shortcomings, and pledging to do better moving forward. For Marcus, the journey didn't end there. While he felt a sense of vindication, he knew there was still work to be done. He joined the company's newly formed Diversity Council, using his experience to advocate for meaningful change. His presence became a symbol of resilience and accountability, inspiring others to speak up and stand together. Months later, as Marcus sat at his desk, he reflected on how far he had come, not just professionally, but personally. The office, once a place of tension and dread, now felt lighter, more collaborative. His colleagues treated him with a newfound respect, not only for his skills but for his courage. Marcus knew the road ahead would still have its challenges. Change, after all, was a continuous process. But he also knew that one voice, when raised at the right time, could spark a revolution. And Marcus's voice? It had done more than spark a revolution. It had ignited hope.